what I mean by get educated is know who you can rely on to help you with that, to jumpstart the business, but also get better educated around the premise of your idea.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. If you ever need help with yours, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat. Now, today we have another great expert episode, and we have Aaron Back. I always want to say Aaron Black, but Aaron Back.
I get that a lot. Yeah, no worries.
Yep. And just as a quick introduction to a little bit of what we're talking about, we're going to talk about probably a whole bunch of fun things, but anywhere from automation and AI and how it's impacting small businesses to, looking at the different information, how it should be viewed, whether you're a small business versus enterprise, to viewing things differently or based on your size of your business and the role in the business, to getting involved with the network community around you and surrounding yourself with peers and mentors that will offset your abilities, maybe even a little bit of low code or no code, and we'll go from there and have a good conversation. So with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Aaron.
Thank you so much for having me here, Devin. It's a pleasure to be chatting with you. And like you teed up there, I'm Aaron Back. I'm currently a senior analyst for Acceleration Economy Network and also Dynamic Communities, one of the founding analysts for our Acceleration Economy Global Analyst Network that we have. Recently just started that whole group. So excited to be part of that journey. And like Devin, I'm also a podcaster and have had a lot of great guests on, and look forward to the conversation today all around these various topics you've already hit on.
All right. Awesome. Well, that was a great introduction and excited to have a good chat. So without any further ado, let's dive into a bit of the various areas of expertise and have a good conversation there. So one that is always a bit near and dear to my heart, at least on the automation side, I always have a love-hate, I don't know, love-hate sounds worse than it is. Love-hate relationship though with AI, more so because I always work with on the patent side, and everybody wants to say they have an AI system or a machine learning, and half of the time it's just it's a simple decision tree, and that's really about it. And then I'm like, well, that doesn't really seem to be AI. So I'm slightly tainted with AI just because I think that there's a lot of good things about it, but it is a way overly used term or misused term. But with that, so give us a bit of an idea, especially when you're talking about small businesses, how has automation and AI impacted small businesses? How can they maybe leverage it and utilize it? And what should they be thinking about?
Yeah, I think you hit on a couple of good points there, is that there is a differentiation between AI and automation. A lot of times those are coupled together in a lot of phrases, but they are two separate things. And so something to note is that artificial intelligence, while we're still, I think we're still on just the tip of where we could head with things. There's so much more to explore with AI, and something to note too is that something recently that's surfaced that I've noticed is there's these AI clouds available now. You've heard of data clouds, I'm sure, for a couple of years or so now. They've been out, but these AI clouds are now this sort of full suite of capabilities and security and so forth to help folks make sense of how can I best use AI. So it has all that capability there in these AI clouds, but that's a lot of times out of reach for a lot of small companies. Those typically scream, enterprise or, very large sort of mid-market companies. But when it comes to the small and medium-sized businesses, AI usually falls into the realm of let's start small and simple, and let's see what we can utilize it for, if it makes sense for us to even use it. A couple of great areas I've seen AI used, and it is kind of a bleed over into the automation area, but is the chatbots capabilities. I mean, we've all used chatbots on apps, on websites, just to interact. It's a great tool for customer service teams, and it also can help, mitigate the need for extra headcount within your company if you're already stretched to the max as a small company, a lot of people wearing many hats. don't have a lot of time. So sometimes
I'm going to jump in just because it's a area where it's kind of that bittersweet. And on the one hand, from a business owner, yes, or automated or chatbots and kind of the AI type of a thing is helpful to offset or reduce, and I can, get more information. So if we do or want to talk with them, or if we do or pick it up live or otherwise schedule a time, I have more insight as to what their problem is. As a consumer, I hate chatbots, or I hate the chatbots that you have to, give this information, and then they try and have you go through the learning library. And then if it's not in the learning library, they ask you 5 more questions to try and not give you to any human contact. And if you finally make it all the way through human contact, half the time it's still the wrong person, or they say, send us an email or we'll reach out to you. And it goes into the Netherlands and you never see it again. So with that, I'll push back, or I'll ask the question. I don't know, push back, but ask the question is, I think there's a room to incorporate that into what, small businesses and startups are doing. But what is the better way to incorporate it? Or in other words, how do they realistically incorporate AI and automation and chatbots and those things into their business such that it improves it and makes it better rather than make it a hindrance for their customers?
Well, a lot of times I think where you're running into issues is where you're seeing companies stand these up, but they don't revisit when they're getting feedback of, did this solve your issue? Did you get your question answered? Did you find what you were looking for? That type of thing. Yes, that sometimes you get those chatbots, at the end. Hey, did you get what you were looking for? But they don't follow up. There's no sort of reevaluation of what's going on, what's working, what's not working. And so therefore you're leaving people frustrated. They go elsewhere. They search for an email or a phone number to call up somebody. So I'm
raising my hand to that one. That should be.
Yeah, exactly. And that leads to further frustration versus further helping. It's almost like counteracting what your intended goal was to help, mitigate a ton of time taken up by somebody, say in customer service, for example, on the phone, going through these typical questions you have to always ask, to get to the root of, like, who are you? Why are you inquiring about XYZ, or what is your issue? And if there was a better method and improvement on that, I think we'd get more traction out of use. And that's just one simple scenario I just mentioned, is this chatbots. Typically you see that for small companies, medium-sized companies, to try to help, offset that. But I get you. It can be a frustration for many.
So now I'm going to pitch one of the ideas, and I do have a patent pending on it. So just in case anybody wants to steal my idea, but or probably never will. But here's my pitch to you, and then we'll get on to the real topic. And this is a complete aside. Is my thought is their solution has always been almost a Uber for customer service. In other words, you have Uber that you can get people on demand that are drivers on demand. Why not, for a lot of businesses, get it to where you find people that have free time that are relative experts. So let's say, as an example, you're an iPhone user. You know everything about your iPhone. You're, an iPhone geek, and you could walk people through how to do just about anything on the iPhone, but you have some free time. My idea has always been, you have an app where, as you need customer service, as that person's available, they log on to the app showing their availability. And then as the customer service questions come up, you just connect them up with it. So you don't have to have people waiting. You don't have to have the staff. You don't have to do it, but it gives you that live and customer service. And then you can have a ranking and rating aspect, so that if they do a terrible job of interacting with the clients, they're quickly put out of the system. But that was always my solution. I still think it would make sense. And someday I'm going to implement it. But it was
No, I mean, just to piggyback on that, I think that, for one, it's a pretty cool idea, and the other though, maybe play a little devil's advocate if I could, is the consistency factor, especially with, say, tech support. You may talk to somebody that didn't work. You get the next available person, and they'll tell you something completely different. Now, you may have experienced that already with the official tech support with folks, but at least there's some consistency behind it, because they have
Now, I have actually technically, and then we're going to get back to the topic ahead.
Oh, yeah. You're good.
But my thought was always you'd have a first level. These are the individuals that can answer. It's always that kind of that 90% of the time people can answer the questions, and you really need the tech percent or tech support that really know the ins and outs, that 10%. So 90% of the time they can help them. And then you have a much smaller subset of what is the company's tech support. They can address those issues. So in other words, you get rid of 90%. You don't have to have your own support system. You don't have to do it. You're paying it on demand and you're only doing it when you need it. And you address 90%. And then for those that really are the exception to the rule, then you bubble it up, so to speak. So that would be my solution. I always think it's a great idea. Someday I'm going to build it, but it's
wouldn't hurt to put the feelers out, see how it'll float, get some, I'll help you test it. I mean, hey,
we'll be doing it someday. So now I'm going to bring it back to the area of expertise now that I've derailed the conversation, but I had a fun time doing
it's all good. It's all good.
But one of the other things that we talked about was a little bit of, difficulty with as a business owner, and this is really all sizes of businesses, but you can be hit with a lot of information if you get into it. You can, everything from how long dwell time on websites to reoccurring revenue to how often do they purchase, do they upsell, do they not, where are they located? And that's just the very tip of the iceberg. And you can get into a lot more. And what is difficult is how to view that different information based on your business, based on your role, based on the size of the business, and everything else. So if you're to maybe talk to us a little bit about how do we view information, how do we gather information, how do we view it, whether we figure out what it means, or should we just not worry about it all and just go about our lives as if it's not there?
Just kind of float along and hope for the best. Throw a dart at a dartboard with our eyes shut. No, I think there's kind of two big buckets, if you will, when you're looking for information. One is I need to better understand a topic or a theme. I hear about it. I've seen it, say, through the news or through posts, but I haven't really dug into it to see what it really means. And to further that point, what does it really mean to my role? Because you touched on that, a bit. What does it mean to my role? Because typically we see in a lot of organizations, there's 4 key personas that are in pretty much any organization. There's your financial folks, you got your technology folks, operations folks, and then you have various lines of business. And under a line of business person, that could still be a CEO, CMO, a VP of a subset of your organization, if you're a very large company. So you got to understand, what does this contextually mean to my role, my persona, what I do? And now that I have a full understanding, this can help me have a collaborative conversation with my peers to say, okay, how can we best tackle if we want to use this? Do we want to invest in it as a technology such as automation, AI, what have you? Does it make sense to do it now or down the road? Where can we best apply it? The other is, now that we have something in place, how do we can pull back all that data? Like you mentioned a lot of these different data points, that these are way down in the weeds, the details, and make sense of those and surface that. Typically, what I say is most helpful is to have some sort of business intelligence tool in place to help you make sense of that, but really help you tell the story with the data, as I put it. There's a lot of great tools out there. Many you've probably heard of, like Microsoft's Power BI, or there's Tableau. And there's quite a few others out there. Those are the top big ones, players out there. But to consume that data, and something very important about consuming data is make sure you're not so narrow in your scope that you're missing some periphery data that could really impact the decision. And what I mean by that is, in your persona, a lot of times, say, a CFO looking at, say, financial data, but it's important to look at the periphery data of what is customers saying, the sentiment that's going on, what's happening over in sales, and the impact to customers, and what does the funnel look like that's going to be downstream, eventually impacting our bottom line. So you got to hit all these periphery information to consume it and say, okay, based on where we're located, we're a local company, but we hit surrounding regions because we're small, but we want to expand. Where does it make sense to expand? Well, we're doing well with this product line. Maybe we can expand a single product line in a new market to test the waters. How well is that performed over time? So when you're able to tell the story with the data, like with an interactive visualization dashboard, you can click through and say, oh, this region's doing really well that we already service. And what are the best selling products that we've got? What type of customers do we have? You can drill into that and get that subset of data. So if you're looking to expand and grow your business, or we're not doing the opposite, maybe there's certain products that aren't doing well, certain regions that we're not selling, maybe we need to pull back so we can, recalibrate our resources, so to speak, and maybe focus on a different strategy. So it's important to get a summarization, because some people get lost in the details, like you highlighted. This point, this point, this point, and you get spreadsheet overload, or you get what I call analysis paralysis, over analyzing versus, okay, let's take a step back. Let's review the data from high level, summarize, and then slowly peel back the layers, kind of like an onion, to get to the root of what we're looking at.
No, and I think that that is the biggest issue with, data, and everybody, I always watch the shows and look at the business things, and it's data, and there is definitely a lot of value to data. One of my favorite, and it's kind of floating around on LinkedIn. So I don't like a lot of the social media platforms, but I am a big LinkedIn user, and I love LinkedIn.
Same here.
And one of the ones that recently, the post, and this one that I think it gets or people repost it and do it as their own, even though it's not their own, but it's the idea of the Lego, and you have the pile of the Legos, and it's, you have this pile that's unbuilt Legos, and it's all in one big pile. There's kind of your data, and then you organize each of them by color, and it's like, well, that's organized data, but it really doesn't tell you anything. And then they kind of, put it into bigger piles and kind of build like walls, and they don't really put it together, and that's the next level of data. And then you actually build the whole house, and it talks about the story of the data, and that's where it becomes valuable, right? It does. And if you have all the data and you don't have it put together, and you don't tell that story of what the data means, having the data doesn't do you anything. So I always kind of reflect, or point back to that as whatever place you have within your business, whatever your role is, whatever your size is you're looking for what this story is that the data tells you. You don't need to get, down into the weeds to the point that yes, I know this customer purchased this on this day, and this is what they purchased.
Right.
This is how long, but telling the data as far as what it means to your business. What is that story is? Hey, are customers liking us in general? Are they not liking us? Why are they liking us? If they're not staying there, not converting, what is that their motivation? I think now it's a lot easier to say that than to do it, because you have to actually figure out what that data means. But I always think taking that step back and actually saying, what's the story that it's telling you, and what does the data mean on a high level? Why do you care about it? Or whatever you're doing.
Yeah. And something that's the tough part is, even small companies are producing volumes and volumes of data. They may not be aware of it, but they're doing it. I mean, if you're even small companies that may be highly transactional, what I mean by that is maybe you're selling products, and you sell a lot of them. You have a high volume, maybe they're not high dollar products, but they're high volume. You sell a huge quantity. On the opposite end, you have high dollar products, not as large as volume. Maybe they take longer to assemble, or go through a lot of QA or something. But with having data in all these disparate places, it's tough to say, how do I consolidate it all first before I can even make sense of it? And so I touched on it a moment ago, is about these data clouds, that's their primary purpose, is say, hey, you got data all over, we'll help you consolidate it, make sense of it. So you have a sort of a single repository to say, okay, here's my data store, if you will, to go then make decisions from the data, visualize it, and see what's going on. Now, again, that's something you'd have to review and look at to see, does it make sense for our size of a company to even tackle something like that? Otherwise, as we know, data is a true asset resource now. It's not just it's nice to have, and we kind of reference it every once in a while. It's a true asset. I mean, there are companies that are actually insuring their data as a resource asset to make sure if it ever gets, stolen, hacked, whatever, ransomware comes along, that they have some sort of store, of insurance in their business, but also it's backed up properly. So a lot of, unfortunately for a lot of small companies, they become the target of these ransomware attacks because they realize that data is valuable in their mind to a different purpose than what your company finds value in. So it's very important to put security layers around, and I mean layers like multi-layer, not a single layer. Multiple layers, have great segmentation of people who have access to certain kinds of data, and then consolidating that data to make sense of it from a decision-making standpoint. So data consolidation, if you've got people internally that are technology savvy enough to do that, bring it all together to a internal data warehouse or a warehouse in the cloud, then do that. But there's tools available to help you do that if you don't. So a couple of routes you can go there.
No, I think that is definitely a good piece of advice. And I think that, everybody is grappling, on the one hand, everybody wants to sell first of all, everybody wants to be a SaaS business so they can get recurring revenue.
Exactly.
And then everybody wants to be a data business, and where our value is really in the data. And I think that it's still kind of catching up to, we have lots of data. Now, what do we do with it? And figuring out the platforms and the ways to analyze it. And
just to aside there, that SaaS model, I know the classic model has been, like a per user per month subscription method style. More and more, a lot of these cloud, as a service providers are using what's called consumption-based pricing. So just something for your listeners on startups are looking to explore some of these as a service products out there. Just be aware, some of them are consumption based, which could work for you, meaning I only access it when I need it, so therefore I'm getting charged for whatever time or volume or something that I'm doing. And then, you could have peaks and valleys because maybe you're a seasonal type of company. You saw a lot in Q4 because of the holidays, or summertime because you sell a lot of products geared for spring and summer, type of thing. So you may have peaks and valleys, so your consumption model makes sense. Now, it is tough to kind of predict and forecast costing because you're not aware of how much we're going to consume versus a sort of a standard, per month type of subscription model. So just throwing that out when you're looking at these, quite a few of them are going this sort of consumption-based route.
Interesting. No, on the one hand, I think on the consumer, I like that better. On the business, if I could go back or stay at the old model and have people pay me, pay me a monthly amount, that's why I think everybody wants it. They're enticed that, hey, because everybody's hope is kind of like, they're going to sign up, they're going to subscribe, but then they're not going to use it again. We'll get the free revenue coming in and we won't have to do anything. But I think that is an unsustainable model for most of them. Like, it may work occasionally on Netflix. If you don't watch the movies for a month or two, you're probably just going to leave it going because it's relatively inexpensive enough and there's a high likelihood. But I think the other ones, everybody wants to be that reoccurring revenue model, but they don't necessarily, they can't always make it fit that model because they can't provide enough reoccurring value that people are going to pay for that subscription. So I think that is a great insight, is an almost at consumption, saying, hey, now if they're not consuming a lot, it ramps down. If they're consuming more, it ramps up, and they can adjust that, and they can kind of move their model is dynamic with them. So I think that's a great idea and a good piece of advice. One of the last questions, and there's always so many more things that I wanted to
I know. I think we could talk all day.
And we'd probably have a good time, and everybody like, okay, you guys have talked enough, no more rambling. But I always have one question at the end, but before we dive to that, we'll hit on just one topic just for a minute, which is a little bit more of getting involved with, kind of the network community and your peers and your mentors around you to help you get different ideas and angles, and maybe talk a little bit about kind of, because I'll back up. I know I just asked a question, then I'm going to change the question. But, the problem is if you're like me, and if you're an engineer, you're an attorney, you're an introvert by nature, and you don't want to get out and you don't want to be there. And now I've probably overcome that, at least in some levels. But I think that there is that, I don't need a network, or I don't know how to network. And so maybe convince us of the reasons why we network, but also how you actually network.
Sure. I actually take a multi-pronged approach to networking, and I'll give you a few examples of that. One, I am kind of an introvert, unbeknownst to a lot of people. I guess it just comes out as needed to be an extrovert, but I think there's a new term for that, whether you're partially introvert and extrovert. But at any rate,
seems like they're coming up with a new term every week.
Who knows? Yeah. But when it comes time to like in-person events, I always go with an intent in mind, meaning I'm going to learn XYZ about a product or a solution. I already have some sort of application, but I want to learn it better, hear from folks. Additionally, at in person, I always make it an intent to get down, say if is an expo floor, for example. Are there vendors I can chat with because maybe they have specific solutions for my industry that I'm in? Or like I do manufacturing, or maybe I'm in supply chain, or maybe, like you said, I'm creating SaaS models. What are other companies doing that I could roll in their product into mine to create my solution that I want to sell? So go talk on the floor, but have intent. So now you know something in mind. You don't feel like at a loss for words because I have a plan. And then a lot of companies, or a lot of people, I should say, have a plan around who they would like to meet, meaning their peers that are in their role. For example, I do, I'm a clerk in finance, or I do something in the warehouse, or, shipping, receiving, or whatever. Or you're a decision maker and you're a VP of operations or something. I want to meet my peers. However, I want to hear from them from all different levels of business. So be open to learning from not just SMB sort of size businesses, but on up the ladder, if you will. So that's in-person events. There's also digital events. And what I mean by that is not just your typical webinars. So I liked here, get a little bit on the soapbox, but our Acceleration Economy Network, we do digital events quite often, mostly once a month. We started up this year. We just did one on the future office of the CFO, and the approach is totally different. Their interview style, they're conversational, so you feel at ease with who is talking. It's somebody that's either in a CFO or a VP of finance or a CEO that's talking about the impact of that role and what they could do. So while you're there, though, a lot of these digital events have chats available. So there's another chance to say, I'm going to pop in and ask a question. You're slightly bit anonymous at that point, not fully because you signed up and registered, but you can chat with others. So it allows you to explore how to connect with peers, or, hey, I loved your comment that you had, or I love that insight. Could we have a side chat on, or can I connect with you on LinkedIn so we can, further the conversation? So those are, two ways to do that. And others is to engage in comments on LinkedIn. So we talked about LinkedIn. You see a great piece or a post or an interview such as this podcast is out somewhere on LinkedIn, listen, watch, read, whatever, but make a comment to and then tag that person so they're notified, and then they can respond, and then you can have a dialogue through LinkedIn messages. So that's one way to kind of build your network around that personal communication, even though you're not face to face with somebody, since we're all remote a lot nowadays.
No, and I like that. And one of the things that I took away from that is I like the idea of coming into the conversation with the ability that you can add value. In other words, a lot of times it's always coming in, well, I've got this great thing and you should buy it and give me money. And it's like, oh, great, here's another pitch. And I don't think that most of the time people are very astute to, hey, they're just trying to get me to sell. They could care less about me other than if I'm going to give them money. And I don't think that adds that value. But, I think if you can come in and give them a offering or service or connection or network or something, do your bit of your, now if it's just on the fly and you're just, mingling and chatting with people, you can still come up with something. If it's an event that's for, cybersecurity, and you're saying, hey, this is something that, cybersecurity, have something that is in your back pocket that you can offer that's actual value. Give you an example of what we've done recently, and not to help or pitch us too much, but, my law firm does a DIY legal services, and it's, kind of filling in the gap for being able to, people that maybe can't afford an attorney, but need something better than nothing. And it kind of fills in that a reasonable level kind of in between that. So it's not such a big chasm. But what we've also done is we put it as a white label service. In other words, it allows other people to integrate our similar service into theirs and actually get some profit sharing and some fees and other things that allow them to do that. And so now when we reach out for, as an example, whether it's other law firms or it's, marketers or service providers and that are always looking to expand their services, increase their revenue, it's not me pitching the service from, hey, white label, you should give me money. It's, hey, I see you're in this. We have some great, great products that I think would allow you to increase your revenue, and it doesn't cost you anything. And we're just really here to help other businesses to be successful as we grow as well. And I think it kind of shifts that a bit of that offering something as opposed to just pitching the service. So that's my slight.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, it goes back to that intent. You go in with an intent of some sort, not to sell, or if you're on the consumer side, I want to go with an intent to ask certain kind of questions. So you're ready to go versus feel like you're being sold to, in other words. And then if you're the person trying to sell, so to speak the language of the customer, meaning tell a story that of another customer that used something. Don't come in and say, hey, here's our handout of some sort of flyer info. We got a demo here. Those are great and helpful as either a takeaway or a, yes, I'm really interested. But that should be after maybe that person comes with an intent with questions or starts the conversation. For you, be relatable to that person. Understand it's the stories that you tell are more likely to connect versus a product you're pitching.
Yeah, and I agree. And even taking that one step further, when we've done it, this is how I pitch. Or pitch sounds like I'm doing the opposite. Talking about, hey, I've been a law firm owner for a while, and I get the grind of trying to always worrying about the revenue coming in and how do I do it? Where can I increase it? How can I offer more value? And that, almost relating it to your personal story and then say, here's kind of what I've done. And then I'm wanting to help others who are struggling with that same problem. And it's kind of what we're working on. You almost draw them in with, oh, yeah, I have had those same problems, as opposed to, let me tell you how you can make more money in 30 seconds or less. And they're like,
right. Yeah.
So
yeah. And a lot of people are looking for those in time short attention span generation that we're in. And I'm talking all of us, not talking old versus young or in between. It's just the society we're in. Little bits of information can be helpful and they can go a long way. You've heard of those listicles where it's like, top 5 things about this. Those help because they're easier to remember, easier to relate to sometimes, but tell a story along with it. And then also it highlights your expertise around a certain area or of whatever industry or whatever your company does. If people understand that you're an expert at certain things and are ready to answer questions, they're more likely to come to you versus you trying to pull them in, pitch to them about what you do. Because, oh, wow, this person really knows about XYZ. So I'm more likely to go and ask them questions and they can answer them. And then, oh, okay, let's set something up. Let's see what you can do or how we can collaborate or purchase or whatever. So I think that's where I'd like to look at things from a connection point, telling the story.
Right there with you. And I think that's great, peaceful. I'm sure we could go on all day and have lots of great conversations. And everybody else is going to tune out and we'll be the only 2 left. But rather than do that, why don't we jump to the question I always ask at the end of each podcast? And it's always kind of a good way to end the podcast because we talk about a lot of different things. And most of the time, if you're a listener, you're looking saying, there's a lot of great things in there and I'm overwhelmed and I should be doing a whole bunch of things, but I don't know where to get started. So with that, the last question I always ask is, if you're talking to a startup or a small business and they can only do one takeaway, one thing that they should get started on today that would impact their business, what would that one thing be?
For me, and what I would look at is quite frankly, just get educated. And I don't mean on how I'll frame that. I was chatting with somebody the other day on one of my podcasts, and he is associated with a venture capital company, VC. And their approach is totally different. When startups are looking, they feel like they're running around like mad trying to raise capital for their company instead of focusing on the idea of what they want to found their company on. Their approach is to say, hey, let us handle that for you, raising the capital and promoting your idea and so forth. So you can focus on your business and you're building up what you need to do. What type of people do you have? The reason I'm going to circle back is what I mean by get educated is know who you can rely on to help you with that, to jumpstart the business, but also get better educated around the premise of your idea. And what I mean by that is not get blinders on to say, okay, this is what we're going to do, but what are some other things that could potentially impact that from all different angles? So if you're trying to sell like you said, some sort of subscription model of something, how are you going to set that up to sell it? How are you going to do the recurring revenue? But peripherally, what could you do as a service to provide ongoing support for that? Is there different ways that you can lever? I'll go out here on a tech limb. I saw an example where a company that makes shower heads, and they sell a lot of these to commercials, so like hotels and so forth, commercial business. And they wanted to have an ongoing sort of steady stream revenue. Well, they came up with the idea to help hotels with water conservation. So they have an IoT sensor in the shower heads to help sense how much water is being consumed through here. And so they can adjust, water flow and where it's being wasteful and so forth. So that became a recurring revenue for them outside of just selling the shower head, and that's the end of the transaction. Now they can have an ongoing relationship with the customer. So explore other areas, get educated about things that may seem outside of the realm of what your idea is or what you're trying to sell or create, to see if there's different ways to engage with your customers that can keep that long lasting relationship for them coming back to you versus, well, I sold something and one happy customer, hope we get more. You want that repeat customer to come back. You want them to have a word and spread the word about you and your company out on social media. So it makes it go viral.
No, I think that's a great takeaway. Is if I were to recondense that back, which is get educated, but then there's the longer version behind it, which I think is a lot of great words of advice. So with that, as we wrap up, if people want to connect up to you, they want to be a customer, they want to be a client, they want to be an investor, they want to be an employee, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Sure. The best way to find me is on LinkedIn. Be glad to connect with me there. That's where I first touch base. You can also find a lot of what I do out on accelerationeconomy.com, which is a lot of site where you'll find a lot of my content. And then Back at It podcast. So join me on listening on my end as I host other folks. So, and I'm sure we can share out a lot of these links with this episode, but that's where you can find me. I'm also on Twitter as well too.
All right. Well, plenty of good ways to connect, and definitely encourage everybody to do so. So with that, appreciate you coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell or your own expertise to share, love to have you on the podcast. Just go to inventiveguest.com and apply to be on the show. Also, make sure to subscribe, like, and share the podcast so that we can make sure that everybody here gets to listen to these awesome episodes. Last but not least, if you ever need help with patents, trademarks, anything else in the business, reach out to us at Miller IP Law. Just go to strategymeeting.com. Thank you again, Aaron, for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you so much.